G'day, doggies fans. All things Bulldogs. We're going to look at the Braith Anasta effect, not the Galvin effect, the Anasta effect. That's right. But seriously, it's an NRL media watch on a very passionate subject at the moment. And we're going to ask some other questions that I think need to be raised for people to decide themselves, as everyone is essentially able to do in this NRL landscape. It is fair for criticism and opinions to be diverse and shared around, but it is also fair for people who influence narratives in the game to be held to account without accusation, but more so to have a look at a whole different set of facts and also estimations in order to see, is this commentary around Lachlan Galvin, Braith Anasta, the Bulldogs, the whole lot, is there something else behind it? Is it a conflict of interest, or is it just a concern from a passionate ex-Bulldog and providing commentary, as is the freedom of speech to do so on that platform, and able to essentially do that job effectively as NRL commentator, NRL 360 host? So, look, we're not going to throw anyone under the bus here. It's simply a question that needs to be raised, because I've found the frequency and level of criticism of the Bulldogs' decision to include Lachlan Galvin mid-season, the change in narratives at different points surrounding players in our side has gone from, by almost polar shifts from some of the commentators, including Braith Anasta. And this is raising other questions that need to be investigated, in my opinion, on behalf of the Canterbury Bulldogs fans. And more so, it's a message for fans that are thinking a lot of these things anyway that Braith is saying. As a fan, you do look at things with a high level of criticism and passion, and none more so than ex-Bulldogs players. But what we will see here is that sometimes the narratives that we think of aren't actually anywhere near the reality. But when the media does so much data harvesting, they understand the narratives coming from the fan base and are able to tap into that more often. And I'm not saying that's what Anasta is doing here, but it is definitely a media tactic. And having spent a little time in the media, not actually in the media, but on other sides of it, I can tell you that it's definitely part of what they've got to do. It's television, it's engagement any way possible, and they're going to stick to what's easy, what's going to bring the most from the public through their headlines. And it's important because of the amount of businesses, but also the game itself that relies heavily on the income that's provided by the media corporations presenting and showing us the game in a 24-hour news cycle. So, look, let's get into it. We're gonna strip this back. We're gonna ask some questions, and then it'll be left for people to come up with their own narrative. Like and subscribe if you want to. And thanks to everyone who supports the channel, members who, pay a monthly fee to help support me and get first access to a lot of the stuff. But anyway, let's get into it. We've got the first heading here: Anasta's strong links to the Bulldogs halves. Now, look, as the Canterbury-Bankstown Bulldogs continue their unexpected fight for a top 2 or a top 4 berth in 2025, the young halfback Lachie Galvin has become one of the most discussed and polarising figures in the NRL. At the centre of this commentary is Braith Anasta, who has really become the leader and focal point of the current criticisms and narratives of the Bulldogs club, the Bulldogs coach, in the way that they are, in his words, accommodating the entry of Lachlan Galvin to the detriment of the playing squad and also to the detriment of the Bulldogs season, is the narrative that's essentially being presented and the reasons for it. Now, Braith is a former Bulldogs premiership winner. Some say Bulldogs great, some say don't. Obviously, a young guy that had to suffer a lot through before the start of his career, and understands very much so the impact of narratives from the crowd, and having huge expectations, being called every name under the sun, being called overrated, and being criticised almost for his entire career. So he understands. He's a Triple M commentator, an expert there. He does his own podcast, which is quite entertaining, that I listen to religiously. He's a high-profile player manager, and more so for the fact that having that platform, he does talk about his players that he manages, but he actually manages quite a lot more golfers and other sports people. So his company is, in his words, dedicated to trying to support and assist and help young men become better people, better sports people, and setting themselves up for a career. It's never about the money. Now, look, Braith and his ongoing criticisms of Galvin's arrival at Belmore have stirred widespread debate, and I've been very, very critical at the fact that Braith has only presented one narrative whether that's from and these are the questions we're going to ask, is it from a one-eyed Bulldog supporter who is seeing a premiership window slip away, and he's worried that if they don't make changes, if he's not vocal about this point, that the Bulldogs are going to continue on their trajectory of losing games, having lost the last two by a combined total of 6 points in games that many would say they should have won. We'll get more onto that shortly. But look, Lachlan Galvin's arrival, it's been very split. He was welcomed so much. We saw the game between Canterbury and Parramatta, which is going to open up to show a real contradiction in the commentary on that. Obviously, some people were trying to tap in. Eamon Sullivan Fox was really trying to own that narrative that Reid Marnie was distraught from being replaced, and taking still images of people. You could see Reid wasn't happy being replaced. That's fine. He's a competitor. His old club, everyone knew that he was leaving the club, even though buzzers tried to make out it's all because of Galvin. So it's not just Braith, it's the whole lot of them. Brent Reed's been playing good cop lately around it, and people are just saying that's because he's in the pocket of Isaac Moses, which is a little bit unfair, to be honest. But let's say player managers are the people that speak to Fox journalists the most. They do not have the same relationships with clubs as Fairfax due to the way that they report their headlines. But not saying Fairfax is, beyond reproach by any means. Look, Anasta's positioned himself as one of our biggest supporters. He bled for the jersey. He'll tell you that. He'll tell you that he's as an ex-player, he knows well and truly the human element of it, and how this sort of distraction would distract players. And he's even gone to the extremes now on his podcast to say that he's actually got first-hand knowledge of players that have told him that this has been a distraction to the club, and they're not very happy about it. And we'll look more into that as well, because some social media interactions have unearthed, a real sort of dismissive and fast response to questions that have been raised, and the conflict of interest in, a player that he manages at the club, who is a really great talent and expected to be doing really good things in the NRL as he continues to develop, and Braith's doing an amazing job with him. So, look, Braith's proudly referencing his passion for the club and his hopes for us to win the premiership. He said that he wants us to win the title. But as the criticisms pile up on NRL 360, in print with headlines, radio appearances with Triple M, look, some people are starting, not just myself, I've heard this from a lot of Bulldogs people who contact me and raise concerns. As someone I am a real defender of our club and a real defender of stability, and someone who doesn't always agree with everything, but puts my trust in those there to know what they're doing and understanding that they will make mistakes. It's about how we trend over a period of time, and everything is trending so well for the Bulldogs from where they were. And I couldn't be happier, to be honest. But look, people are raising the question on whether Anasta's dual roles as a commentator and player agent may now be in conflict. So Anasta's strong links to the Bulldogs halves. As a half himself, he has really earned the right to give commentary and opinion, and also mentor lots of halves in his player agent group. And he manages Cameron Munster, who, unfortunately lost his father recently and was absolutely outstanding in Queensland's resurgent. Ever since being named captain for Game 2, they played a lot better, and the Queensland folklore lives on through these very players like Cameron Munster, and he's done a great job with him, obviously, helping him, become a better person as well. Like we all know about Cameron Munster, he's had his issues, he's partying, but this year he's made those decisions to, give up the drink and do a lot. And the Melbourne Storm are ticking along, and him and those important players are starting to improve. And you could see last night how much he's grown as a human being. But look, they've also got Jonah Peze, who's down in that system. Lachlan Ilias, who we've heard a lot about, and look. Anasta's had moments where he's been critical of Lachlan Ilias. Not so much of Munster. Munster doesn't really get talked about too much. Did talk a little bit about his contract situation. And I'm not sure if that's right or not right, but it allows him to promote what he's doing as a manager. And I think that's a bit of a unfair advantage to other player managers. But look, player managers can go out and try and become media personalities if they want. They can do their own podcasts if they want. And it's really up to them. But at the end of the day, hasn't talked about Alex Conti too much, but he really stood up for Canterbury when people was talking about, how they didn't have a half, and he sort of talked about the fact that he brought Alex across for the Halves Academy, and that he couldn't be happier with the way that young Alex is being developed in that role. And look, his agency represents Alex Conti, and look, Alex is a gifted. Many people within the club have said, I've heard stuff coming out of the club that they do believe he's an NRL future prospect. He's been called a leader. He was a captain of the Balmain side, in 2022, which was the joint feeder club, obviously, with the Western Suburbs Magpies to the West Tigers. Now, in 2022, Lachlan Galvin was considered a playmaker, but was playing on the edge at that point in that grand final where West won. He was brought back to the club, after going to the Parramatta junior system. He was at Westfield Sports High as well, and had a really strong relationship with Luke Vella, which a lot's been talked about, and something probably not talked about enough when we're looking at why he's come in. But look, at the time when Conti come, there was literally no real long-term blockages in the halfback system. No locked-in halfbacks. Kyle Flanagan was off contract, was copping a lot of flack. They ended up getting Carl Oluwapu mid-season. who sort of got fast-tracked in. Toby Sexton came in mid-season and from Queensland Cup to debuting, and the Bulldogs beat a highly undermanned South Sydney during that origin period after going down to the night 66-0 and being booed off the field the week before. At that time, too, there was still a little bit of uncertainty around Mitchell Woods, the anointed one, the prodigy, who's a very, very classy young athlete in demand from many codes. And many were saying he was going to choose what his mum would have preferred, which was the AFL career. Well, that's what people were saying is what she preferred. But, who knows if that was true or not. Now, look, while Anasta has praised Sexton during the club's strong start to this season and also at different times throughout last year, he's never really strongly defended Sexton as a long-term premiership half. He has said stuff like, look, I'm not ruling out that they can't do it. I'm not saying they can't do it, but the but's there. And look, I've got some footage of that shortly. He has said that, sat there while a whole bunch of commentators have said different things. Buzz Rothfield's been going on about the Bulldogs not having a half for, since mainly more so since Gus Gould come to the club. And as soon as the Bulldogs sort of suffer a few losses or things don't look so good, Buzz is the first one in there to essentially say the recruitment stuff. Gus was brought in to fix things. He's making it worse, all this sort of stuff. And Braith Anasta has really challenged Buzz, which has been pretty good for us in that way. But on this, which sort of doesn't make sense because he's seen us have a couple of games where we haven't done well, and while he's obviously critical, he used to be critical on the pre-game shows, not as critical as say a Corey Parker who is Mr. Praise everything while it's good, just absolutely stomp on anyone while they're not playing well. Whereas Michael Ennis is always talking about how great the good things that he sees more so. So they're best mates, them two, bit of yin and yang. Look, so he always suggested Toby was doing well when we won. But when we lost, it just seems that winning and losing just dictates the narrative when it comes to Braith Anasta. And I know that's the same as a lot of Bulldogs fans. And this is no accusations here because maybe it's just part of him doing his job. It draws in fans. It draws in outrage as well as people agreeing. It draws in questions. It puts pressure on players. It puts pressure on the club, which is all part of the territory that these young men and now young women have to navigate on their way through. But look, for me, the apparent indifference towards Sexton contrasts very sharply with Anasta's vocal criticism of the club of signing Lachlan Galvin. Now, while Sexton was never going to be a long-term block to Conti's path, Galvin, who's the same age, as I said, they were in 2022, they were playing in the Harold Mats, different sides, but both feeder teams to the West Tigers. And look, Galvin's been valued at $1.2 million, people. $1.2 million. Now, I have no doubt that Shane Richardson gave an inflated offer because the writing was on the wall a long way out, and he was told that this kid wanted to get developed. Now, when we make the comparisons to Benji and a Serrauto, for example, I think Benji Marshall is one of the greatest blokes in the game, and I think he will develop into being a good coach, and he might be a great coach now. But what he's seeing with Cameron Serrauto is people from obscurity now being hotly talked about playing Origin, with all making extended lists in this season. Now, it didn't help New South Wales win, but Kurt Mann obviously helped Queensland win. So Galvin's a $1.2 million valued playmaker from Shane Richardson. And essentially, I think this has alienated Galvin a little bit because by him rejecting that, it raised the whole thing that Wests weren't good enough, which galvanised, pardon the pun, which everyone says now, that team to say, well, if you don't want to be, if you're not with us, you're against us, sort of thing. And then we had the online stuff, and look, I think Wests have played this season with all the criticism they cop. I feel they're on the pathway to doing a lot better, and I think Galvin could have helped them along the way. But he wanted to get development, and that's the end of the story. The development that he wanted, and whether that's going to eventuate, we will see. But the Bulldogs have gone out and spent about $700,000 a season for a few years. And we all know about that story and people saying Gus is a liar and all that sort of thing. But what I really noticed is that obviously Braith had a fair bit to say on it and sort of leading the discussion as the host of that show, which is part of his job to ask these questions. And I get it. I totally get it. And it's a story that seems to keep giving every time they lose. Now, I wrote an article that basically said Shane Richardson's done the right thing by his club, knowing this kid wasn't going to stay, and by essentially making it almost untenable and pricing it so other clubs really had to pay some money if they wanted to get Lachlan Galvin on their books. And if some of those players within the club hadn't sort of gone too far, he'd probably still be there, is what I'm trying to say. There is absolutely no evidence to suggest that he was agitating the whole time for release. That's just a narrative, right? It's not proven. Yet it's funny, My mate said the other day that on one of my other podcasts, his parents come home after being away all year, and just by reading headlines, apparently Lachlan Galvin is a real troublemaker. And that's exactly the point of what I'm doing here, to say, okay, is there other motives? Is it purely to get clicks? Is it partly that and partly the fact of people just doing their job and people that are really passionate about the club, like an ex-player in Braith Anasta? I know a lot of fans agree, and without any of this commentary, some of our fans would have said some of this stuff, right? But everything seems to be dumped back onto the individual in Lachlan Galvin. And I do know that Braith is actually criticising the club, but he knows that it's funneling towards Lachlan. And the fact that he hasn't let up is the concern I have. And that's why I am starting to sort of entertain these other questions of the conflict of interest. So you've got the conflict of interest of being a player agent who manages halves, and here you've got a half coming to the Canterbury-Bankstown Bulldogs who is valued by Shane Richardson in the top 10 players in the game, who's actually played over 30 NRL matches, is only 19. Influences the scoreboard, which is proven through assists and that sort of stuff, even though there was rhetoric that he was given all the ball, and which isn't true. Maybe last year, but not this year. He defends all right for someone who who is actually about 10 to 12 kilos less than he's going to be. And that'll be a challenge for the Bulldogs training staff to get him there. But what we are seeing is that Anasta's commentary has become more frequent, more passionate, ever since he led the charge that he believed that in his gut, the Bulldogs were going to make a play when everyone else was saying it was Parramatta. And for that, it started to open up a few people's eyes and go, And, when you open your eyes, doesn't mean what you're seeing or thinking is actually reality. But the thoughts do pop up. Why is this? So if he doesn't see Toby Sexton as that player that's the long-term option, he knows the Bulldogs haven't signed him. He knows that Sexton announced he was going on the market last year, at the end of last year, put off contract talks till November, apparently. I love Toby Sexton and what he's done for the club, and I was hoping he would sign an extra 12 months. And look, when people talk about what people deserve, if I was to say, what does he deserve? I'd say a 2-year contract on 500 to 600 grand. But you don't deserve anything. You earn it. And then a business decision is made by multiple parties to see if you get it. Now, what it comes down to is that if the commentary was from a lot of people, and the narrative was that Toby Sexton, from Bulldogs fans, from not all Bulldogs fans, divided, probably split 50-50, from the NRL community, from a whole bunch of different voices, said that Toby wasn't going to take the Bulldogs, and the Bulldogs spine wasn't good enough to go to a preliminary or go further. Right? That's been the narrative. Okay? And no NRL club has now offered Sexton a deal. I don't know if he was offered. I shouldn't say that. He may have been offered a deal, but a deal wasn't done with Sexton in the NRL. And next year he's off to the Catalan Dragons in the Super League for 2 years on about 500 grand. And I believe he will star over there. But essentially, what everyone was saying is sort of turned out to be correct. He wasn't seen as a long-term option, whereas Mitchell Woods was. And many were saying, who have been watching Alex Conte and Jersey Flegg do really, really well, especially with his own game and the way it's building at different phases. The team has their issues connecting. There's so many in and out. They're there to build the future to play NRL. It's not always, and they know that sometimes causes cohesion issues when players are being trialled and being trained for specific things real time. And look, Alex completely understands that. And many are saying he is the one who would come through with Mitchell Woods in comparison to like a Jerome Luai and Nathan Cleary coming through at the Panthers, which will be one of the next videos talking about Cameron Serrato's influence on what many people say are some of the greatest NRL players that they've seen winning 4 grand finals in a row. But we will talk about that at another time. Look, this is where the questions of potential conflict of interest arise. Look, Anasta's dual role, it puts him in a position where his public criticisms about Bulldogs' playmaking future could directly affect the standing of that player. Now, there's no doubt that Galvin's image is tarnished, and that show has definitely helped do that at different points, whether they've put it on his manager or just talked about it, and which presents that it's on him. Reporting things from James Hooper, like the playing group were basically turning their back on him when he made his speech that he was leaving, and that they basically ostracized and alienated him, which has been told to be wrong and debunked. The fact he's been widely criticised for suing his team. All I'll say is that 19-year-olds make mistakes. 19-year-olds, sometimes their filter's different, and that can be really dependent on the way they're raised or, their environment. I'm not saying their environment's bad because they react badly. It just could be in their DNA to showcase that immaturity sometimes, where they just have no filter and it comes out when they're unhappy. And it happens to 30-year-olds. It sometimes happens to 50-year-olds. These are the sorts of things which happen at every club. But the fan base seems to think that tying wins or losses, if you win his signature and you've lost his signature, that enables fans that lost his signature are able to attack his character. That's part of the game. That's fine. But this just pile-on is going massively overboard. And we've got some estimations here. Don't take these as absolute gospel, as they may not be. Look, this is an estimation, but the frequency since April 2025, Braith Anasta has discussed Lachlan Galvin in 14 NRL 360 episodes, estimated, 7 podcasts, and 4 separate radio segments. Now, this is triggered over 30 headlines. I think it's actually more than that, but I'm just going to go on the conservative side here, and that's across News Corp, Fox Sports, Triple M, affiliate sort of websites and social media platforms, which sometimes will do 12 headlines for one article. An estimated 4 million social media impressions. Now that's based on research on the amount of impressions that the NRL and fan sites get across all these different platforms, and the hotness of this topic, and then looking at the negative sort of responses depending on the site that you're on and the percentages of those. So it's rather in depth, and it's actually quite a wide impression range, but it's like a minimum of 1.5 to approximately 4 million. Now, I know that's a big difference, but 1.5 million impressions of different narratives, negative narratives for the majority, is a lot. And family and friends of this young fella have to really sort of deal with that. And it's not right. It really isn't right. And when you've got a narrative and you're pushing it so hard and you seem to be the leader on it, and as the host of the show, no doubt, I get it. But pushing it, it raises questions, especially when Braith knows the gravity of mental health, which he's come out and said. And as a Bulldogs fan, I've always loved Braith Anasta, and that'll continue. I love the club a lot more though. And when people hurt the club, I speak up about it. When people hurt players, I speak up about it. Banter between clubs, different kettle of fish. I get it. I don't stick up for it as much, but I definitely don't contribute highly to it either. But I draw the line at, you got to draw the line somewhere, and I draw the line at the Canterbury-Bankstown Bulldogs. And whilst, some of it's a bit of fun, and, you can't take everything seriously all the time. And Anasta's, you can see he has a lot of fun at different times with some of the ways. He's a bit cheeky, but he's also got an ego. But that, as we talk about rugby league players, a lot of them need that ego to do what they did. And sometimes that ego takes you far. But to be held accountable, you've got to be able to show that you can accept that people are going to raise questions and not tear them down for it. On social media, though, we're seeing a little bit of biting when it comes to this subject, and that's another thing we're going to talk about shortly. Talking about the mental health toll of media narratives, while his criticisms are squarely directed at the Bulldogs management, he has not come out and said that Lachlan Galvin is a problem. There's been discussion about him being a young guy, and, questions have been asked of Galvin, yes, but there's been no real drive to attack him as a person. It's more so the Dogs' decisions in what Braith's saying when Braith explains his intentions is basically throwing away their season or putting their season at risk and windows don't come around often. And who's to say they're not going to, really struggle next year and have it all fall in their face? And that's sort of the narrative that's being pushed as well by a lot of people, because people are thinking it anyway. But when the media validates what you say, and this happens with all spectrums, you feel like people agree with me. They're saying it right there on the television. It must be true, but it doesn't mean it is true, right? And that's what we need to look at. But I just think, the fact that he's put this on Cameron Serrato, obviously Phil Gould as well. A lot of the time, people just say Phil Gould's doing the changes. Like they just seamlessly just go in and out of it. You see it on when people post stuff. They go, "Oh, Gus is changing the side. Gus is pulling the strings." They talk about when the coach coming across had to be able to be puppeteered by Gus, and really, it's also just a narrative that doesn't always hold weight. Okay. And I just think that this disproportionate quantity of blame being projected at this young fella is just absolutely shameful, to be honest. Look, the terms like the Galvin effect, that's it's shorthand for the Galvin is supposedly causes instability wherever he goes. People even said that when West beat the Roosters on the weekend, 6 weeks after he left the club, that was because they didn't have Lachlan Galvin. It just keeps on giving. Debates around his character based on vague and unproven reports from his time at the West Tigers have been recycled with little verification. And there's growing concerns that the media pressure is affecting his mental health. But apparently they're really taking care of him and he's okay. But people have a right to be worried. And look, and that'll happen as well. He throws a few bad balls, he gets taken off, whatever it is. People will start that narrative that the online bullying and focus on him is contributing to it. And I don't want to do that either. Like, sometimes silence is the best response. You try and let it die down. And I actually did. I tried not to worry about this stuff. I don't want to keep it in the media for the sake of it, for my own agenda. People know what my agenda is. My agenda is to type less and to talk more and to sit here with the community. And yeah, you do get a little bit of monetary benefit, but the cost for me to do this outweighs it. Just so people know. And I don't want to be a media personality. I don't want to be a career. You can see quite clearly the podcasters that do, and good on them. Chase your dreams, mates. Go for it. I'll be bloody cheering you the whole way. But if you say stuff I don't like just because you want to enhance your career, I'll be the first one there to tear you down. And that's a good way to build resilience. Is to cop that criticism. But look, for a 19-year-old finding his feet in the NRL, the level of scrutiny has it's been excessive. There's no doubt about it. And the weight of constant criticism and the perception that he's the root of the team's disruption, rather than just one of the many changes during this origin period, which Braith knows too well about. You've just got to listen to them when they talk about the fact that certain teams who don't have the origin players are able to make good ground on the competition. They often talk about the Warriors. They'll talk about the Sharks and teams like that. Oh, because they haven't had that, or they'll say they've got no excuse to lose these games. And we used to see like the baby Broncos had come out and over exceed when 11 of the first graders were playing Origin back in the day. These are the type of things and narratives that just flow around. Yet, because it's Canterbury, because it's Lachlan Galvin, it seems, it's different. And with Anasta amplifying this and providing audio to it so often, this can really exacerbate the problem. So we're going to look at the Bulldogs' recent form, but just to give some context how we notice these contradictions when talking about the Bulldogs and then and now. Like, these are subtle, but they do paint a picture to me. So let's have a quick look at this.
I want them to win, but I'm with you though. Like that is the that is the question mark, and it's not saying they don't have the spine or they can't do it. I think they can, but that is the big question mark hanging over them. Is when you get those big bright lights at the back end of the year, you need to come up with big plays when the defence of the opposition is a hell of a lot better. Yes. It's a season.
They've shut out two clubs.
Now, to explain that was after we'd won 6 or 7 in a row. And there was a lot of praise, definitely. And it's the way that they go, look, I believe they can win, but at the back end of the season, they're going to need to produce those big plays. And then they have the focus on Toby in the picture. And that's casting doubt. They're casting doubt on his ability. And they've said it in plain words. They've said these words on numerous occasions. Buzz has said it in articles. He said it on TV. The Bulldogs need an accomplished half. They need an accomplished half in order to progress. And they've said, whilst Toby Sexton is doing a good job, he is not a long-term option. Knowing that Mitchell Woods is coming through and players like Alex Conti are going to take time, knowing that Toby himself needs time to develop, which is one of the criticisms as well currently being talked about, and rightfully so. What we need to understand, though, is that the narratives change depending on a win or a loss. And for some, it only takes one loss to say, I told you so. Or one loss to say, oh, maybe I'm wrong. It doesn't matter what they say. They're given a script. Essentially, they play the good cop or the bad cop, or they agree with one or the other. But generally, you'll find in the room of NRL 360, even though there's 4 people in that room, it's rarely 2 versus 2. It's very rare. It's always 3 on 1. And there's a reason for that. Because it's basically to say that most people are thinking this, and only a few people are thinking about it in a different way. And essentially, those people have got their heads in the sand, quoting Braith Anasta on social media, from what I read today. So, look, there's been huge heat for the last 2 matches, especially. Now, we're going to look at a clip from Braith on his social media podcast, talking about his response to Galvin's first game. The fact that they made changes that many were surprised by, well, pretty much everyone was, in which Reid Marnie come off the field at the 55-minute mark, and he was having a really good game, which he hadn't really done against Parramatta too often, where he'd had a really good performance. He worked his butt off. He tackled well. His speed, his of pass were all on point. His choice of kicks were good and weren't overplaying his hand. And he was doing his role really well. And coincidentally, also auditioning for his future club, when we know that he agitated for release, or the option to go and check out his options. And there's lots of stuff about Reid leaving. But for the most part, from NRL 60, especially Buzz Rothfield, since 2023, has been on a vendetta against Reid Marnie as well. But now he's suddenly Reid's best friend and can't understand why a player would be let go mid-season from the spine. I suppose 2 doubles it up. But a spine which he said wasn't good enough to go the distance without a proper halfback. A spine that included a player which he has cast doubt over being able to hold his nerve and be disciplined enough to take Bulldogs to where they need to go. I believe Reid can, but I also understand that Reid needs to red line and push the envelope in order to do what he does, because I rate him as the gutsiest player in rugby league. Yet as Buzzers labelled him a grub, the opposite, a coward. Now, when we talk about Braith, he sort of doesn't really push too hard when it comes to Toby. He's definitely amplified his support of Toby since Galvin's arrival, though. And people have asked, is that because Toby wasn't seen as a stumbling block? Yet Galvin is, being that $1.2 million player value, going straight into first grade. And we talk about how Braith said that all Bulldogs players have to earn it, except for Toby Sexton himself. I understand complete different circumstance. And I'm not born yesterday. I know we're on top of the ladder. But many of people have said that it's unexpected. Many have said that we haven't played enough of the heavyweights. And we've been showing up still with our smaller mobile pack. So potentially, Braith feels that as well and thinks that we have self-destructed our, thrown away a minor premiership potentially and a chance to have a home final both weeks if we win week 1. But if he's thinking about the likes of Craig Bellamy's and Ivan Cleary's and Wayne Bennett's, it's all about the top 4. It's all about being tuned to perfection. It's all about having the right people available, ensuring you've got combinations going at the right time of year, and having contingency plans in place so that if a key player goes down, you can bring one in. Remember 2014, Braith? Isaac Luke couldn't play the grand final. Coruscant did. Now, one will say Coruscant didn't get any first grade, which sort of makes it a different point, right? But Coruscant has proven to be one of the best players going around since then, and has won titles at different clubs and has been preferenced over Talon Silva, a good friend of Lachlan Galvin, to keep their club stable while they continue to build the youth that want to be there. Now, there's so many layers and so many varied opinions that can come out, and that's fair enough. But as I said, when you channel it in a way which is funneling towards one person as a real pylon and a real shit show, where they're just getting attacked from all sides, surely you understand the damage that's causing, and surely you understand the questions that can be raised. So, look, the last 2 games, they've really had a crack. And one of my criticisms is that why can't Braith sit there and raise the other narratives as well? Like, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Okay, they thought this way, but it didn't work out. Now, what are they going to do to reassess? Ask the question rather than telling them what they have to do, just like a silly couch punter would, like I would. What I used to say they should do. The last 2 losses come by a total of 6 points. We should have won both games, yes. There was lots of similarities in the way the losses happened, but also in the way the games were played. since Galvin's arrival, the 4 different games. He's only played the 4 games. But the other view is that our club has had, unexpectedly, 5 players missing through Origin, plus numerous players through suspension and injuries, which have all come back in at different times, including depth players who need to get that experience. Jacob Carraz, Crichton, our leader. Max King, our leader. Kurt Mann, our leader. Matt Burton, our leader. 2 18th man games. Injuries to Satili Tupanua, who was like an enforcer for us off the bench and a leader. Jamin Salmon, who copped so much criticism, but finally fans turned around to see that he was holding up the middle early and keeping that pressure on and keeping that focus going and that swarming defence and that unrelenting, goal line defence too when under pressure. To then have Kurt Mann come on and change the narrative and punish the opposition when they're at their most vulnerable and at their most fatigued, with his ability to use his footwork or to switch the play to the other side with footwork to go in and back away and run around and then go to a short side and link up. With 90% of the time he does that, the Bulldogs either make a break or make significant ground. And when he runs the ball, he generally has the ability to make that decision while he's got the ball, whether he uses his leg speed and footwork to get through the line and get a quick play of the ball and generate something positive for the next play. And then we saw the try against Parramatta, where he just went through with stepping off both feet, making them look absolutely bewildered, and Harry Hayes backing up to score. And the Parra game and what happened in that game, which we're going to hear from Braith now, and his support of that, is a defining factor in the mindset change that has happened since Lachlan Galvin's arrival and the lessons that the team hasn't learned in setting the game up the exact same way every single week. Well, not the exact same way, but setting it up as far as a domination of the first half and then expecting for what happened in the Parramatta game to happen when Galvin come on against the Panthers, and also having Galvin there, which to me shows that there's a real belief that Galvin is bringing that ability to create differently. And you can see how seamless and easy it is for him to drift from left to right. Sure, he's made some mistakes, throwing some terrible balls in the last game. But the action and where he was is so important, and the connection and cohesion that he may have down the line, because in my opinion, he may not be always in the side in this run home when you've got Jamin Salmon fit, when you've got Kurt Mann fit and Bailey Hayward fit, unless they make a decision to go all in on Lachlan and to, move Toby to hooker or Hayward to hooker or keep Reed there and drop Bailey Hayward or drop Toby Sexton. He's got options and he knows what he's probably going to do. And whatever decision he does, Serrato, will be the best decision he believes for us to win a comp. And we'll talk about why you would doubt him on that. But everything is just Galvin's fault. But let's watch this video.
I think, he delivered, and what worked was him coming on and moving key positions that didn't seem to actually improve them. They were in a wrestle, and then he just, the class of him, Burton played his best game of the year. So.
And there you go. So that was in reference to Galvin. They moved the positions. It worked for them. They were better. See, I was way more reserved with it, to be honest. I was there. And Parramatta were about to crack because we timed it to perfection. And when he come on, we still kept grinding. But the weight of possession and keeping ball in play against a team that had Mitchell Moses, and they went all the way with Penrith. But we run away with that because we'd set that game up so well. And we had a full complement and everything went the way it was supposed to go. Come the next game where we're missing our origin stars, Lachlan Galvin and Sexton, they said it was probably his best game or best 28 minutes. South Sydney again looked devoid of options, looked like they had nothing. Latrell was there. Jamie Humphries was back, who I feel is a really good talent. Jack Whiten, who looked like the only one with the ability to stop or create something. And I think it was 28-0 before the Lightning stopped play. Obviously, South's come out after that stoppage. They got a lot of penalties. They use their shoulder. They sort of help force a bit of that momentum that way. Tackled a lot better, and were able to make a game of it and nearly run over us. And that's been actually a common denominator all year from round one. A lot of teams that we've put scoreboard pressure on we've had to sort of win the game twice. And the other way is where we've sort of just kept grinding and had small leads and not had the scoreboard pressure, but had the possession pressure and had the, the field position pressure. We've actually gone on with it late and cracked sides and defeated them. Look at Newcastle's 2-0 at half-time. We win at 20-0. South Sydney, we win at 32-0. Parramatta, we win 16-8. We go set for set. You see, there's a lot of similarities in what was happening here with this game plan. But you'd think there's one narrative. But as you can see, you win the game and Braith is fully in support of it. Not over the top, but he supports it. So he's actually given a compliment to Galvin there. And that's where you can sit there and say, well, maybe there isn't a conflict of interest, because that may be an example of that. But as you know what you're seeing now. And these are all going to be talked about and addressed as questions, not accusations. It's important that everyone knows this isn't an accusation. It's simply a question. And I feel if you're going to ask questions of individuals and of our coach and of our club, or just present a narrative that people are burying their heads in the sand, and this is the narrative coming from a passionate ex-Bulldog, and now that he's got proof of it, well, there's probably a good reason he's got proof of it, because he's got a player within the club which may raise some frustrations and make his job harder to do in managing that. But I don't know, because if he's out there giving this narrative of punching this Galvin down, what's he going to do to his own player? Is he going to attack the club for playing his kid? I don't know. If his kid's valued at 1.2 million, decides to come over, and I think he'd probably understand the process. Yeah, we're giving him important time, because if we need him in the back end, those combinations are going to be essential. They're going to be you're going to need them. Now, it doesn't mean that it'll pay off, but you'd feel a lot more confident. The team would feel a lot more confident as well, having someone come in that they've just shared blood with and, sung the team song with and, gone through in the trenches together and lost with. on the way to those games. Now, Serrato's strategic reshuffles. Now, was this misunderstood or was it misinterpreted? I'm really not sure, because I value Braith's opinion, and I would think he'd have an understanding of the other various narratives that could be talked about. Maybe they're not as sexy, and maybe then he's being told not to worry about that. Maybe he's under direction, and maybe that's just him doing his job. But when you go out in your podcast and double down on it, is it belief? It must be. I can assume that. But I'd also go, or is he just deliberately misinterpreting it or misrepresenting it? Because he's repeatedly questioned whether the reshuffles were there to accommodate Galvin and that they're weakening the side. And anyone who's sort of tried to say that it's not, he's just gone heavy at them. And we'll have a look at that now. Now, Braith makes it clear that he's attacking the coach, or he's questioning the coach. But it's more than the question. He's telling the coach that the coach is wrong. He's telling the club that they've done the wrong thing through this period. Simple. But essentially, the club's followed all these guys' advice. They've gone out and bought a playmaker that's been valued at $1.2 million and brought him into the club, just like numerous other people have, although Braith said that no Bulldog has ever come in and not had to earn their spot. Well, earning your spot's a little bit subjective, I guess, because when you just line it up with coming mid-season, playing first grade straight away, maybe there's something more to it that we're not hearing. Specific things they've got to do, maybe an initiation process they've got to go through that maybe Galvin didn't go through. You know, toilet roll, naked across the field, lit on fire, and you've got to run 100 metres before it catches up to you. Who knows? I don't know. But let's watch this.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, okay. Well, Galvin was there then.
Off the bench.
So that didn't seem like.
And he came on when the Bulldogs were winning.
Okay, exactly. But at the
And then what
weekend,
happened?
they didn't have any origin players, so they had to shuffle
It's not
things
Galvin's fault,
around.
this, by the way, at all. Not at all.
Right. At the weekend, they had to make changes because players were out. So they were always going to make changes at the weekend. There was always going to be a reshuffle, right?
You had to move Burton, did you?
Well,
Did you have to move Burton?
Yeah, well, that was
you
answer the
didn't.
question. Well, you didn't have to. Well, what's it matter?
So they chose to move Burton.
Yes, they
So
chose
they
to
didn't
move
have
Burton.
Why did they move?
Was that an issue at 18-0? Was
Was
it an
it-
issue at
but-
18-0?
no,
It's an issue when they lost the game.
Why did
So there you go. There you go. It's Brent Reid playing good cop. And these guys, Braith asking the question basically like he's not copping what Reid's got to say. And Buzz taking it really seriously. And Braith pretty animated about it. Gordy's just having a nice old laugh. And we'll say again that Gordon is a champion, regardless of what people think. So look, basically through that whole period, he's repeatedly questioned whether the reshuffles are there to accommodate Galvin. And he's basically saying that they are. And he's saying it's weakened our team. But when you look at the balance of it, it's already proven a strategic decision. And when you hear that Marcelo Montoya is held off having this surgery on his collarbone and neck for weeks, you understand why they've developed an Ari Tawala to be coming back from injury and getting his reps up to play on the left wing. He's been playing there in New South Wales Cup. He's been named at centre most of the time, but a lot of time spent on the wing. That's just one point. So Marcelo Montoya plays on the right, which he's done quite a few times at Canterbury before leaving to the Warriors and that sort of stuff. Bronson Cherry's played on the right-hand side numerous times and swapped in games this year before Galvin's arrival. Okay, so he's done a lot of that stuff. So, guys, like, and let's look at the Matt Burton thing, which he basically teared it apart. So it didn't work. Do you have to put Burton there? Well, Anari Tuala, now that Marcelo Montoya has gone out for 6 weeks, you can see that was part of the plan. Anari's going to play on this left wing, and he's now got an important 80 minutes under his belt. Lachlan Galvin's got 200 minutes under his belt, which could be, absolutely essential. And expect more mistakes. He's 19. And the Dogs had banked points, unexpected points, to be in a position to say, look, this opportunity's come up. We have a chance to build a combination with this kid right now. And whether they're planning on utilising him, which I never thought was the plan, that's just my thought process. I could be wrong. My thought is that when Salmon and all them come back, Galvin's going to have to bide his time a little bit. Maybe they'll give him a little bit of time with Mitch Woods, right? But then Anasta's acting like everything's fallen apart. And he's literally searching for stuff to back up the narrative is what I'm seeing. Like he's saying he's not. He's saying like he can assume being the player. And he says on social media, as an ex-player, me and Rennie, heaps of other fans and players feel the same way. And that's a fact because they've told me. I have no doubt he's got a player at the club, so they've likely to have told them how they feel. But that is still just not an accusation. It's just a question. It's an assumption, but it's actually a question because when you assume something, you're not always right, are you? Right? Is Alex Conte angry that a player that was there before who was praised for the Bulldogs being in the position they're in, but was looked at, basically, it looked like he was never going to get a contract from the way it planned out, and talking about Phil Gould's responses when asked, he's on this development journey and blah, blah, blah. And, even a few days before he announced his signing with the Catalan Dragons, Phil Gould said, well, there is still a chance he could be with us next year. We're not going to talk about that. And I was asked about that, and I said, look, he's technically telling the truth if it's a 1% chance or more than 0% chance. Okay? But guess what? I always felt that his manager, who has partnered with Peter Bedell quite a few times to essentially talk to the Bulldogs through the media and to create this sort of, I think they've helped create this support for Toby, because there is a narrative out there that Toby is a bit of a lucky charm. And he is. I think he is. Right? I love Toby. But I've got to trust the club. I'm going to trust them to make mistakes too. And I might be dwelling on it years later. Who knows? But that's the way it crumbles, man. I'm not going to smash a board for it. People just get things wrong sometimes. But it's when you say there's agendas that there's, that's where the lines get blurred. And when fans start talking about agendas, that makes things more complicated. And I'm doing that now. I'm talking about potential agendas. And should questions be raised on these agendas? Because there's actual evidence that sort of adds weight to the questions. But it doesn't mean you could sit there and think this is definitely what's going on. I can sit there and tell everyone you've got your head in the sand if you think that Braith Anasta is not doing this to, help put a stain on this person's career to the benefit of his own young halves. Like people are saying, and I don't think they have any evidence, but they're saying that Braith Anasta offered Jonah Pezzett and Lachlan Ilias to the Bulldogs and were denied. I know there were fans that said they'd like to see those two here, but we don't know that. And no narratives come out about it. No reports ever come out about it. I'm sure it's been discussed. But looking at Matt Burton, if the New South Wales lose 3 or 4 centres, if Bradman Best goes down again, if Campbell Graham, the next centre that they're bringing into the side is Matt Burton, outside of the two that they picked, right? Or Tommy Turbo or Matt Burton, right? Not Bronson Cherry. They're bringing in Matt Burton, knowing that he can play there, and if someone goes down in the halves, he can also step in there, and plus he can do his kicks. He just adds that extra dimension. And his running game is great. So why wouldn't Cameron Ciraldo use that? And Ciraldo also said, which Braith does not mention, that Burton said he was going to do that. Now, against the Dolphins, before Lachlan arrived, Blake Taff was named at centre. He didn't defend there, though. Matt Burton defended at centre. And they did swap around a few times during that game. And look, the Bulldogs were still a chance to win that game. The Dolphins were just played a better 80-minute performance and were able to really run away with it, especially when the Bulldogs had that forward pass called on them that wasn't forward. So the point I make with all of this is when you've got a player like Matt Burton and you can give Lachlan Galvin this experience with Toby Sexton and Reid Marnie on the field and Bailey Hayward. You know, he brought in Jake Turpin when everyone said, don't ever give him a go again. He was our best player against the Bronco. It was his for that first, 20 minutes. He was on for 30. First 20, 25, he was sensational. It was, and watching him and Marnie smash Adam Reynolds and the pressure that he put on, the line speed. You could have thrown Jake Turpin into Origin for Queensland that night. I don't give a hell what anyone says. He would have done a job for you. That's how switched on he was, because in his first game against Dolphins, he just tried too hard and in the wet went a bit high a couple of times unnecessarily. Yet that's enough for fans to say never again. Never again. He's too small. He's hopeless. He's got no discipline. And they'll try and tell you he's undisciplined everywhere. Maybe. I've watched a fair few of his games. He's got a really high tackle efficiency and he works his ass off in the middle and he passes off the deck, barely runs. And for halves who want to play that style, which we do, the link men and the halves get the ball on the advantage line in quick time. And that's what he can do as well. But I digress a little bit, just to suggest that there's a whole bunch of changes made. They brought Jack Todd in, who was gassed after 3 tackles and 1 hit up. Then knocked the ball on the last one. I think he'd come off for a HIA, may have copped it, but he looked like he was struggling to get back in the line. Maybe he did cop something and it hurt him. But those minutes help and they count. They're all experience. They could have brought Lipoi Hopoi in and had that extra energy, but they didn't, because they see something with Jack Todd that they really love and that they're going to back and that they believe in, and they wanted to get him some minutes. Sam Hughes got heaps of minutes. Now, DSF wasn't available due to a really stupid law. And then we see firsthand Brendan Piakura, eyes rolling in the back of his head for about 5 seconds after, being smashed out of the tackle. What's he do? Oh, it's a cat 2 for him. Like, this is the shit we've got to deal with. And you don't hear the commentators talk about how inconsistent that is compared to what we had to suffer. And that was another thing against that game, against the Panthers. when you're talking about the Lachlan Galvin coming in, if DSF is there for 20 minutes, I think that Lachlan Galvin doesn't come on till about the 60th minute. Okay? I felt he pulled the trigger too early. He saw something in the Penrith defence that made him think that this is when the team were going to switch on. And when Galvin come on, the team went away from what it was doing. They stopped the grind in play. They overplayed their hand a couple of times, and then it took them 15 minutes, 20 minutes to wrestle it back, which they tried to do, and then had opportunities at the end to win. They just couldn't crunch. And, Penrith played so desperate in that match. The Bulldogs lose that match by 2 points against a team, and it was called the Game of the Year. And from what I've heard, was at such a high intensity that no games come close to the intensity of that match and the speed of that match. And the only try that was scored was by the Bulldogs. The only defence that was cracked was the Panthers. They got a charge down. We never conceded a try while they were in possession. Now, they nearly scored a couple of tries, but they didn't because our defence was on. It was a game that I believe flattened both sides. In fact, like not flattened. Penrith were lucky to get, I think, a break after that, get a bye. Bulldogs had to play Brisbane the next week. And we got out to that 18-0 lead, which I felt was fortuitous in many ways. But the way we restricted their meters, their defence was on from the get-go. Their discipline was bad early, but they really beat us in an old-fashioned way through the forwards. From the 28th minute mark, we started to throw the ball away, and it continued with 57% completion from that period on. The momentum turned. We took a shot at goal early in the second half, which I think gave them a leg up as well. And people started to say, the Bulldogs have got no attack. In an Origin-affected match, missing 5 players. Yet again, the only narrative seems to be that we're accommodating Lachlan Galvin in that match. Jake Turpin, Jack Todd, all got important minutes. Sam Hughes gets important minutes. And Lachlan Galvin gets important minutes in that match. And when you've got the centre of the year, Dally M centre of the year, a New South Wales Origin centre, and someone who could play centre for Australia, going there for one match to defend Katoni Staggs, one of the best and toughest centres to get on top of when he's on, it makes complete sense. Do you think Anari Tawala or Marcello Montoya in the centres or bringing up one of our young guns like Jonathan Sewer would have been up to the task? Maybe. It's all subjective, but I sincerely doubt it. I think the best person... And how many tries did the Broncos score on our left edge in defence in that match? Tell me. I don't think it was one. All on the right edge. And the right edge was criticised because obviously we had our left winger and left centre now playing on the right edge. But as I said, they've both done it before. Of course, it was going to be a bit clunky if we stopped playing set-for-set football. And we stopped doing that. It didn't even become a situation where we were throwing the ball around. We were just making errors, just trying to grind in the end. And it was concerning. And we didn't learn the lessons against Penrith that we needed to continue to grind even when we got a lead. And it's been a lesson for us in a lot of games that we actually have been lucky that we've been able to get away with winning those matches. Even when we got the game back against the Roosters, they were able to come again because we started to get ahead of ourselves. The team has a lot of self-belief and confidence, and sometimes that can turn into recklessness. And it's got nothing to do with Lachlan Galvin. In fact, only in the way that they believe that they're better when he's on the field. And I even think Toby and Reid think that as well. But these narratives aren't being talked about. It's just not being talked about. So Braith seems to have a bit of a selective memory, and I think these narratives are questionable. He recently claimed that no Bulldog player has ever been brought into the team mid-season, which is what I said, or earned their spot. And it's not, I can demonstrate that it's not true. Toby Sexton joined from Queensland Cup. I said there was different circumstances. I get it. Chris Naninu, Sam Perrott, both played grand finals coming in mid-season. Rod Silver. Remember Rocket Rod? Mid-season transfer from the Roosters. Seems to be a few. Dylan Walker comes across to Parramatta. Now, I know it's a different circumstance. He goes from a team that's winning the comp in the top 3 to a team that's rebuilding off the bottom, and he's made a hell of a difference. Didn't have to earn his spot. They're common. They're often uncontroversial. I get the Bulldogs were leading, but yet again, I'll double down. Leading with a player that has been doubted and dismissed as having the ability, not from me, not from many fans, but from the commentators, from the experts, from a lot of ex-players, from our club, who said he's not ready yet. Defence has been so much better. And look, they've even tried to bring the narrative that Toby was, come in and did well when he come to the club, and then they threw him behind Drew Hutchison because they knew the narrative of Drew Hutchison was so toxic with a lot of Bulldogs fans. When the fact is that narrative's wrong as well. Toby thanks Drew, looks up to Drew, his experience, his calmness, his leadership. And the fact that he can sit there and put his shoulder into some of the biggest second rowers in the comp and put them on their ass. And the fact that he's so gutsy, he'll attempt everything coming and work until he can't fucking move. And sometimes we saw that happen, where he was late to the party in attack because he worked himself over in defence for the boys. And he did that for 10 rounds while Toby was given specific goals and KPIs to work on, knowing that he was going to be coming back and being utilised by Cameron Serrato, who said, you will be coming in and playing a big part in this season. I need to work on these things. And once you get them down pat, and I trust you, and everyone trusts you, you'll be back in and you'll be running this team or helping to run this team. And that's exactly what happened. But the narrative is, we're losing games. We had some losses. Just not being talked about with any sort of balance. Everything's all or nothing based on whether you win or whether you lose. Now, we're going to shift focus here a little bit, because when asking a question about whether, being so animated about Galvin, when definitely not like that about Toby, it's sort of, that raises your question that maybe Galvin comes in and a player he manages, and let's just say, forget that he manages him, right? And I'm not saying this at all. Like, I have no idea. This is just all speculation. And I think the kid's fantastic. I watch him on Bar TV every week, right? Great talent. I want to see him playing for the Bulldogs for a long time and coming in. Hard to imagine that happening, but I know that it's gonna. I know everything's going to change. We're going to have peaks and troughs and dips on the way to where we're going, which is far beyond where we are right now, even when we were on top of the ladder in 2025. I know that in my heart. And the evidence points that way. And looking what Serrato's done in 3 years with a lot less, compares with some of the best of all time in the starts of their careers. And for many, it outdoes them. especially in turning players from obscurity and no names into state of origin selections. But there's this other layer to this, which is about having the ability to promote yourself as a player manager to other footballers, and also, contribute to narratives or ask questions, just like I'm doing here, of other player managers, or give perceptions of it. Allow it to play out without any sort of defense. And there may be something out there that I've missed. I haven't watched every single episode, but I reckon I've watched 99% of them in the last 20 years. Okay? Or however long they've been bloody going for with Ben Eichen. And I want them to bring controversy cornerback with Hoops and Buzz. But let's look at the Isaac Moses factor. Look, you can ask the question based on the frequency of discussions, and look, this is a widely held narrative, so it's not exclusive to Braith, but it's still there. Moses is Galvin's player manager. Now, just seeing on Braith's podcast this week, his frustration at Buller joining Isaac Moses. And he spent a year at the West Tigers, so he'd be feeling that for them as well. But he knows what the place is like internally. Well, when he was there, he does. But there's a history there of questioning clubs and players and talking about Moses controlling the narrative at clubs. When you look at a lot of the clientele that he has, the fact that he mentors some coaches, they're fair questions, no doubt. But a lot of those players aren't household names. Isaac Moses looks after Kurt Mann. Kurt Mann's done nothing but have his best year of football since coming to the Bulldogs, best couple of years. That's a fact. It's a fact, and everyone will say it. Newcastle fans knew how he improved their team, though, every time he went on the field, especially off that interchange role. There was a pathway that was emerging there. So you can't give all the credit to the Bulldogs. But I can give a lot of it to the Bulldogs and to the individual. But he's with Isaac Moses. But it's worth noting that Isaac Moses still manages a large stable, and he's got elite athletes across rugby league, football, on huge contracts, right? And he still manages Cameron Smith. Now, the continued loyalty from Cameron Smith and some of these people, knowing what's been accused and speculated, does raise questions on the validity of the criticism that's gone that way. And look, I used to parrot it as well, because that's what you do. I'm actually doing these type of podcasts in order to combat our own narratives that are validated by media, because sometimes, and quite often, it's just not true. Yet it becomes historical fact in the realm. And whilst we're never going to stop it, my aim isn't to stop it. My aim is to simply have a few people reconsider. And the feedback I get all the time is that I never thought about that. And it's not to attack Braith Anasta, but this is to stand up for our club and the decisions that they're making, and to show that potentially there's something else going on, which is pushing these narratives in our face on a day-to-day basis. And I'm over it. I'm no one. Okay? Just a fan in a community here with the All Things Bulldogs podcast, the NRL Media Watch, and making sure that when we look at the stuff that they're presenting, that we try and, dig a little bit deeper and actually find out. And you'll see with the articles on Buzz Rothfield that using his own words, his criticisms of Canterbury are often in direct contrast with the advice he gives to Canterbury and what we should do. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, depending on where the narrative lands, depending on where all the receipts bank up, receipts that are generally only part true or sometimes not even true at all. But loyalty from Cameron Smith after the salary cap scandal, which Smith was exonerated from, where he had an additional salary cap in secret, which wasn't declared to him apparently, or to the NRL, which is what the Melbourne scandal was about. Isaac Moses was reprimanded for a role in that. Now, why would Cameron Smith choose to go with someone who put his whole career at risk, apparently? Why would he? And that raises questions about Cameron as well, I guess. The best hooker and one of the most influential players to play the game, who are hated, who stuck his finger and did squirrel grips on Aaron Woods in Origin 2 in 2013. Right before Woodsy scored a try. A few minutes. But anyway, no one cares. Love listening to Cam, love listening to him laugh, love his bias, love when he's not biased. I like Cameron Smith. He's hard not to like. But his loyalty to Moses raises the question. Why would he still be with this Isaac Moses if Moses was that bad of a manager? Why are people continually swapping over to him? Why? Moses does the managing. He's doing the sale to them with all this spectre around him. He's making money out of these players, right? His employees who, like, he sits at the top of the tree, but there's a whole bunch of managers underneath him managing the players individually. I don't know how many there is, but there's more than one, all right? And it's a pretty big group. He's the head of the strategy. Yet they sit there and say, Isaac Moses agitated for it all. Or his company, potentially. But it's different with Braith because he's out there saying everything and doing everything. And to me, this is just keeping people accountable and having them rethink their strategy a little bit, that maybe the tone is a bit loud and a little bit too often and a little bit too frequent. And I also suggest that if Daly Cherry Evans was the player come across to the Bulldogs, I have no doubt that there'd be Bulldogs fans that would say, we don't need him. I have no doubt. Why are we giving this Manly player? A lot of people don't like Daly Cherry Evans. They don't. They saw him as a turncoat. They don't see him as genuine the way he talks to the media. He has a game face. He has a media face. And he has his personal face. And he's a little bit different. He's got a thick skin. He does things his way. And I did an NRL media watch on him, suggesting that I did not like the way that I felt that he's thrown his own club under the bus, the way he went about it, in spite of what he didn't like from the management of that club. He has thrown his teammates under the bus. But still, I don't think that's a reason to write off their season as a cause. If anything, it's like, let's get together and make sure we all go out positively. Let's get this sorted. That's okay. You've done that. Thanks for your service. Let's get on with it. It's not ideal, but who cares? But I just don't think it would have come with the same, aggression. Look, obviously, Dully goes into that side and Toby then plays a different role. Maybe goes to New South Wales Cup. Maybe Toby agitates for June 30 release. prior to June 30 release. I don't know. So there would be some acknowledgement of disruption to the roster for sure. But, I've seen patterns with our Bulldogs. Players which are sort of off contract at the end of the year, suddenly doing a lot more TV appearances. Sometimes at the start of the year, they'll have a story on them. It's all an audition. They'll, Reid coming up for Magic Round as the representative for the side. I'm knowing that Magic Round is a hot spot where managers and clubs all meet with certain players, where clubs are actually angling to have certain players and helping players that don't want to be there or that they know they can't keep, but helping them find new homes. Like, for the most part, it's all done in a way that's professional and everyone's sort of happy. Yet the media always want to present it as, poor Toby Sexton, poor, but Braith. What about Connor Tracy? Burton's going to move him out of fullback, Braith. And he was such a great fullback. They're coming first on the ladder, Braith. What about Reid Marnie? I've never seen a better hooker than Reid Marnie at the Bulldogs. He's left. Now, why would he leave? Because of Lachlan Galvin, Braith. They want to get rid of him, but they're making out it's all him, Braith. Funny, though. Why would they let a spine player go, Braith? But then when he's talking about the Canberra Raiders sitting second on the ladder, letting their halfback go to another club and not matching an offer of around 600 or 700 grand, not too much for a halfback where the team's coming second. Stories on how great the relationship between Ricky and Fogarty are, which I'm sure they are, to be honest. So I have no doubt on that. I believe that. I have no reason not to. But it seems the narrative's there to suit the audience and to suit who's saying it. And it completely contradicts itself. They were leading the comp, and why would they announce two of their spine players leaving to go to new clubs in 2026, Braith? I don't know. Why would Canberra when they're sitting second and now first, why would they have let their player go to another club and announce it when doing so well? I know it's a little bit different, but it's also a lot the same. It just seems that it's all targeted at chaos at Canterbury, which has always been the way. And the reason it's always been the way is because people that used to report to Buzz, some no longer with us, right? People who've had influence at Canterbury and then not had influence at Canterbury. Some that have just passed on little furfies and made Buzz look silly, which upsets him. I'm just doing my job, Braith. And look, they've done such a wonderful job. And I have to give credit to Gus Gould. Oh, but he's destroying his own season, Braith. Look, guys, let's look at the social media backlash with an Alex Conti question when it comes to Braith knowing players that are under confidentiality have told him for a fact that there's a disruption there and they're not happy. And look, if the dogs communicate in a way where they're not transparent with everyone all the time, that's the way they choose, and there's always consequences with that as well. But I don't know. maybe keep everyone on board with stuff. And even though when you do that, sorry, you're going back here, you're doing this, you're doing that. I think there's always lessons for clubs and coaches and the way they do things to get better. I know for a fact that a lot of my coaching, where I thought I was just the greatest and knew everything, and then you go to another place and you get to reinvent yourself a little bit, and you realise that you actually weren't nowhere near as good as you thought you were. And then you're able to actually do a more comprehensive and better job, and learn the things that you didn't even recognise were weaknesses, and you're actually able to work on them and bring them up to strength. And with the Bulldogs, I'm sure there's parts of those learnings there for Cameron Serrato, but the fans and these commentators sit there and say, why Serrato must change the player now? I was going to read all the headlines out, but you've seen them all. And it shits me. There's Bulldogs groups, some I'm a part of, that want to share these narratives because they want the algorithm to work for them. Because I'm sure everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people investing their time want to sort of get some sort of return on their investment at some point. And whether that's just the dopamine hit of being thanked or appreciated, that's all a lot of people need. Some don't need that. Some just get the dopamine from seeing how many members they can get or how many likes they can get or views they can get with what they do. And I totally understand it. Now, look, when Anasta was questioned on the premise that he knows people, it was suggested to him that one of the players that's unhappy is potentially Alex Conti. And he was very dismissive, calling that comment takes the cake. Basically, it's insane. It's ridiculous. Never heard so much dribble in my life. The response was, well, it's just what we're hearing, which is what the media say. And, well, you better check your sources because they're just absolute dribble anyway. Cheers, have a good day, And then you'll see there's a lot more interaction after that. And I think eventually the last comment would suggest many of the things that is being suggested in this video. And you would think that Braith, he hasn't responded to that one. Don't expect him to. I wouldn't expect him that he will. But I think he would understand that not all fans are just going to sit there and take every narrative for granted just because an ex-player says that's the way it is. And I understand that not every fan's got their head in the sand. Because I can tell you now, I don't. I've got criticisms of the club. I felt that this may destabilise us. I was aware of the narratives. I was worried that some of them might be true. But the fact of the matter is I'm going to trust the club and trust the process because I've got no other option. And I'd rather believe in people because I'll tell you something about clubs, especially with constitutions where you can lose your entire board on 100 signatures in an ERM, an emergency general meeting, EGM, I'm sorry. There's so many people on contracts. There's so many people on contract. You see, it just gets to me. How people can be so dismissive of the other narratives, especially when it comes to an ex-Bulldog who understands the impact and the pressure that it puts on. And he's applying the blowtorch. Now, is it because he's just, as I said, just really angry that we've thrown our season away or potentially doing it? But surely, do you really have to go to that length? Do you have to go to that length where you go, I actually know people? People are questioning whether I know stuff. Whether, he's essentially throwing if it is true, he's throwing them under the bus. But when it comes to being asked, was Alex Conte, one of the guys he's doing a great job with managing, was he one of the ones who feels that his pathway's blocked, that he feels disrupted, that he feels that he's not going to get an opportunity at the Bulldogs? He's not going to get to showcase himself there the way that he wants to, that maybe he's just going to be considered, someone that needs to go somewhere else. It's fair, just like it would be fair on anyone in the Bulldogs Academy. So take Braith out of it, for example. It'd be fair to think that. And a lot of fans have. It's not, but when we sit there and feel sorry for players, though, and disruption, this time of year sees a lot of people realise they're going to lose their job. And that's what I was talking about before I sort of tangent off again. You've got all these volunteers, you've got all these juniors, you've got all these parents, all the families. Now, when you cause disruption, and when the pressure's on, and if the club doesn't respond and the performances don't go the way they want, you start to dip everywhere. So all I know is that the amount of work and momentum and effort being put in from everyone, from the media managers to the people taking the membership calls, to the players themselves, to the people cooking, everyone involved, the sponsors, the volunteers, everyone, the board, the admin, they're all trying to beat each other to work. They're all trying to be there first. They all don't seem to have lives to go back home to, because they want to prove themselves at this club, and they love being there for the most part. There's always shit at every club, but there's a whole bunch of kids that aren't going to wear the Bulldogs jersey next year. That's all they've ever focused on doing, but are realising that their dream is pretty much over as far as a Bulldogs pathway goes. Some are going to develop later and could come back to bite us. Some will be told that, sorry, we don't see you as a fullback here. We see you as this, and they might say, no, I'm this position. And they might go to another club and be told they're a fullback and might become a great fullback. It happens. These things happen. We don't have to sit there and say, I feel sorry for Toby Sexton and I feel sorry for these players. They're professionals. Toby has come from being in Queensland Cup to being able to go and live in France for a couple of years, play rugby league, which he loves to do, and get paid fucking good money to do it. He's got nothing but happiness and praise for his development in our system. And he's still a big chance of being a premiership winner and getting a ring on his finger, which may just force the hand of our club or another club to say, hey, come back, Toby. And that happens too. People backflip. Even though they got a contract, they just go, no, I'm not going to. Or they get homesick real early and start moving around. Like Joey Manu, he's going to end up back at the Roosters. Everyone's saying that. They've been making the stories all year. Is it true, though? The door seems open. Look, my final thoughts on this. And that's just got every right to his opinion. And our Bulldogs fans, we do share a pretty wide spectrum of views on when Galvin came. Some weren't sure about it, but are on the bus regardless. Some were so excited about it and are willing for us to dip, if that's what it means, to go even further. Some are just as bad as those attacking Galvin by dismissing the players already there, basically saying, they're not good enough. Now, I know that's been raised here. Based on public opinion, was Toby seen as a bigger block to young halves coming through and other players coming through as Lachlan Galvin is? And the answer is no, he wasn't. That's a fact. But whether that comes into Braith Anasta's passion for this subject is for other people to decide. And I honestly, I don't know. I think he's just a one-eyed Bulldogs fan. But at the same time, I thought he was a lot smarter because he does communicate pretty well and doesn't mince his words. And by doing that, it's the fans who actually, at the end of the day, hold the responsibility for the way that they treat this 19-year-old kid. But he should know how he influences that. If one person is simultaneously managing a player in our academy, shaping the public discourse, and leveraging that national platform as the most viewed NRL sort of news discussion talk show, to criticise our club's decisions that actually do, if you really look at it, affect their client's pathway. Knowing, though, that plenty of Bulldogs have accepted the challenge and have just gone ahead and got ahead of players that are on much bigger money who have come with bigger reputations. We've seen it play out the last couple of years. Preston went ahead of everyone. Carez takes one game and he's captured hearts and minds and he's in, never to be out again. What about Bailey Hayward? Jack Todd, Lipboy Hotboy, Harry Hayes. Players who come here, not seen as a big threat elsewhere as well, playing better. Max King. Hasn't been everyone. But you look at the juniors that have come in and had their crack. They've accepted the challenge. And I have no doubt this kid's going to do that as well. But if you were to be a fair and reasonable person and say, is that going to affect that kid's pathway? Of course it is. Does it affect Cassius Tia? Does it affect Mitchell Woods itself? Well, it is. It's a challenge. But it creates competition. And the same people criticising have also said that Toby Sexton has played better. They've also said that Reid has played better. Look, I just don't think this is a smear campaign at all, what I'm doing. And it's not. My reach is very limited and targeted at Bulldogs fans. But this is accountability. And Braith will respect that. But I do ask, should the NRL, if they haven't already, look at this relationship between player managers that have influence on the narrative while working for corporations that have contracts to broadcast the NRL? Look, and it's fair to be critical or supportive of criticism of other player agents. Is it? When you have this job, are you able to sit there and essentially compete with player agents? And I don't even know the goals. Braith probably doesn't want to have a big book. But it's a good question to pose in case we have a situation where this unfolds again or is in another sphere. We see James Bracey's going to be on the board for North Sydney, but also hold that role he does. Now, I feel that he's a really positive storyteller. And, the next Ken Sutcliffe, like, I love James. Gus himself's always tied to conflict of interest. And stories have been raised about Braith in this capacity as well, which obviously he would not like. But when I see what I'm seeing unfold in real time at the frequency and noise level that it has on multiple platforms, knowing how it's funneling into just absolutely all on this kid. even though the target is the people that made the decision to bring him there, both his exit and his arrival, I do believe that it's fair enough to ask these other questions, because the change in tone, especially on Toby Sexton and players like Reid Marnie, has been quite interesting. While supportive of Toby, never fully committed to the cause that he is the one to take us on a journey and be the one we need. With huge doubts about our ability to go further in the comp and to win those big games with those big moments with him at the helm. And Braith has said that himself. With Braith, quietly supporting the changes and the accommodation of a halfback, which Randy's definitely against. That's seen our team win in a great day in front of 60,000 fans. These are all questions that need to be asked. Well, they do for us Dogs fans, because if you're going to take Braith's narrative that we're destroying our system, and it's the Galvin effect, and it's all this sort of stuff, and the club's made a big mistake, and you're going to put pressure on our club, and everything's going to, the definition of our season is going to be defined on the shoulders of a 19-year-old and his inclusion or accommodation, with narratives being said that it's in his contract that he has to play for us, as if Moses is controlling Phil Gould or Cameron Ciraldo. That's absolute nonsense. And people who suggest that have got their heads in the sand. Dogs fans have to fight back. And those fans that are, only pop up and say stuff when we lose are part of the problem. But that's their prerogative. And at the end of the day, I know they love the Bulldogs as much as I do. We just see things from a different point of view in different ways. And this could all be the same with Braith Anasta. Could have nothing to do with the roles that he holds. But from the outsider looking in, I'm seeing fair questions to be raised. And, and I think it's a good idea that we attend to all the possibilities rather than just going with this one line and one direct narrative that's been influenced, that the Bulldogs and the coach don't know what they're doing because they're just trying to fit a kid in because he's some toy or just some, means to an end. No. Our coach has shown enough strategy and enough commitment to the principles he believes in to go ahead with a process and with a strategy and a plan. And he knows how to massage the media and give the vague statements, give in-depth answers, which essentially just attend like Band-Aids to keep people at bay and away. He knows what he's doing. And he knows he'll make some mistakes, as do I. But what them mistakes are always aren't in plain sight. And we need to trust the process and keep the faith. And Braith, as a supporter, I hope he's doing the same thing. And I'm sure he is. But it's time this narrative started to dissipate. And I know the Bulldogs winning really helps shut that up, but it may not happen. So we just need to look at all the information before we put it on the shoulders of one kid. Thanks for listening, everyone. I hope you got something out of that, and I look forward to speaking to you all soon. Go the Dogs.